Hello and welcome to Obinna TV. So for now, this is the Daily Show KE where I look at the top issues in Kenya, Africa, and around the world. So basically, it's both in the celeb world and in the political world. So for now, I think, of course, you've all heard of Azziad Nasenya, that is the famous Kenyan TikToker. Basically, that she is under depression. Basically, she is in debt after borrowing about 400,000 shillings from her friends. So, Azziad Nasenya, the famous Kenyan TikToker who pioneered TikTok in Kenya, is apparently in depression after borrowing 400,000 shillings from her friends. And of course, you can, so are celebrities faking their lifestyles? Maybe that's what we need to ask. Are celebrities faking their lifestyles? So basically, can you be a celeb in Kenya and live the kind of celeb life that you have Hollywood figures in America living? I think, yes, we have six-figure earning celebs, but I think for you to be living that kind of the latest Mercedes Benz, having a swimming pool in your home, having a line of nannies working for you. I don't think we've reached there. I don't think there is any Kenyan celeb that has reached there. I think the amount of money that Kenyan celebs command maybe is in the region of 200,000 shillings per month. I don't think it has reached or maybe 300,000 or maybe 400,000 shillings per month. I don't think it has quite reached millions per month. So I think a lot of Kenyan celebs are still struggling. So basically, I think Azziad Nasenya, basically, she is a brand influencer, and when you are a brand influencer, sometimes you want to be seen in the latest hotel, you want to be seen in the high upmarket hotel, you want to be seen in upmarket neighborhoods, you want to be seen in Runda, in Kitisuru, you want to be seen in Lavington. That's where the Kenyan celeb has to take a picture in so that then it can look good on Instagram. Sometimes I think Instagram is just selling us seven-figure lifestyles. So that broke people then feel bad about themselves. So I think for Azziad Nasenya, then the problem is that she has really, Azziad Nasenya has really basically been was living beyond her means, and so that means Kenyan celebs don't have much money. You look at the screenshot which Calligraph Jones shared some time ago. He got only 3,000 shillings from music royalties, and I think maybe gets paid about 1 million per performance. Compare that with Diamond, who gets paid about 20 million. Compare that with Burna Boy, who gets paid 115 million shillings, or maybe Wizkid about 100 million, or Davido about 80 million. So you can see these artists command in the millions of dollars. So basically, not like ours who command only a few million shillings or even 800,000. So basically, and I think that was the spat between Diamond and Willie Posey, basically because Diamond fetches 20 million shillings, while Willie Posey, I think maybe the appearance fee was only 1 million shillings. So you can imagine, and I think they had a spat on who will perform first. So you can see that basically our celebrities are living beyond their means, and so that means we need to make art pay in Kenya. Art is not paying. Yes, it is paying, but not so much as to make someone to be fully dependent. A lot of creative artists in Kenya are also having side businesses in order to be able to afford a full blown lifestyle. A lot of them also have side businesses. So does art pay in Kenya? Do the creative arts, do creatives earn enough good money, and do creatives earn enough money to be able to floss the way Hollywood celebrities floss? I don't think so. I just think that they are on their way there, but they are not yet there. So I think right now then, for celebrities, I think it is incumbent upon us to be able to live lives that truly reflect. But then for a celebrity, they don't want to live a life that is, for celebrities, they don't want to live a life that shows they're poor. That's the other thing, and that's why mental health is a common issue. Mental health, comparing yourselves to the other person. Mental health now is a big issue because people are in depression because you see your friend someone posts on Instagram that they are driving the latest car. They have got they have gone to vacation in Dubai, in Maldives, while basically you cannot even afford 50 shillings for the day. So this is what described is fueling up mental health. This a constant state of comparison, and I think in Australia the social media age has been increased to 16 years. So they have said in Australia that children below 16 years should not access such platforms as Facebook, as TikTok, as YouTube. That's what Australian law says, that as an under age person who is 16 years and below, you cannot access Facebook, you cannot access YouTube, you cannot access Instagram, TikTok, even basically because they see, they think this is about. This is really just about peer pressure, basically putting pressure on kids to behave in a certain way to be able to afford a certain kind of lifestyle. And that's the other pressure of social media, because remember, the business model of social media is premised on you just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and never leaving the site. That is what the business model of social media is. That is, you just keep on scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and never leaving the page. And this is why they have billions and billions of dollars, because they say if something is free on the internet, then you are the product. That is what it says. That is just as simple as it can get. If something is free on the internet, then you are the product. So basically, this means that social media companies have to do more in order to dissuade users from basically this life of over comparison. This person is doing better than me, or look, he's in a holiday in Dubai, he's in a holiday in Mombasa, in Kilifi, he's in a holiday in Maldives, and I am sitting here, I have no money at all. So that is the business of comparison, and that's what makes it so hard for social media. That is what makes it so easy for mental health to be an issue. So depression is a big issue in our generation, especially among men. At least women talk about their problems. Women talk about their problems. They when women share out, but men rarely share their problems, and that's the issue about it. You have Obinna really being strong on mental health issues on men, and so basically women usually do share what is bothering them, but men never share at all, and that's why then mental health is a top issue for men. So that's it about Azziad Nasenya. Do you think she is undergoing depression? Do you think Azziad Nasenya is undergoing depression? Basically, she borrowed several, I think, from several people. One of them 400,000 shillings in order to live in such a palatial place. But of course, then her team at Cloud Sound City, and they say they are with her, they pay her enough money, they claim, and so they say Azziad Nasenya is one of them. They will not throw her under the bus. So that's what her team at Sound City says. They will not throw her. They will not throw her under the bus. And then another issue is about companies closing down in Kenya. Lots of companies are closing down. What's happening? Companies are closing down in Kenya, and I don't think it augurs well for the country when you have several investors leaving the country. Basically, that shows they have given up on doing business. The purpose of government is not to create jobs, but to create an enabling environment for jobs to be created. That is the purpose of government, to create an enabling environment. And one of the enabling environment is to tax businesses lowly, so that then they can have lots of leeway in order to hire more people, so that then they can get their operations off the ground. So that's what's about government creating an enabling environment. So basically, you have President William Ruto, basically with his taxation. There is no country that has taxed its way to prosperity. That is what President Ruto should know. There is no country that has taxed its way to prosperity. Basically, you have lots of countries. Basically, you giving tax rebates to to companies so that they will set up operations in that country. But then for Kenya, we are overtaxing our businesses. We really are overtaxing our businesses, and it just doesn't augur well. So I will hope that for now, and then we will be very conversant in letting businesses set up operations in the country, and then we lower taxes for them. But we don't do that. We don't lower taxes for these businesses, and so that's why we need to be able to at least maybe even give them tax rebates, maybe 3 years not paying any taxes at all, so that then they can set up their operations, and then when they begin hiring, then when they begin selling their products and services, then we can and then we can you can tax those people. The idea is to increase the tax bracket, not to increase the tax rates. That's the idea. So if you one way to increase the tax bracket is by making more people formalize the operations. And so one way to make more people formalize the operations is the taxes. And I think you have the Peruvian economist Dr. Hernando de Soto, that is the Peruvian economist, a property rights economist, Dr. Hernando de Soto, a Peruvian economist. He says that the amount of dead capital, what he calls informal wealth, that is dead capital in the world, is $10 trillion. That's what Dr. Hernando de Soto says. The amount of dead capital, that is informal wealth, around the world is $10 trillion. So well, imagine if we could just formalize this wealth. And much of that wealth is in developing countries and Africa in particular, because we don't formalize wealth. So basically, when we formalize wealth, when we formalize Mamamboga, when we formalize border operations, and then that's how we will be able to increase the tax bracket, and that's how we'll be able to fund the tax operations. Otherwise, when you hear developed countries reporting of an employment rate of 2%, it's because they don't it's not because they have all formal jobs. Some of the jobs are informal. Here in the country we will consider them informal jobs, such as maybe saloonists, jobs such as barbers, barber shops, jobs such as maybe mamambogas. They would be formalized in America, but here we don't formalize such jobs. And the beauty about formalizing such jobs is that these businesses will be able to keep records. They will be able to keep records, and so they will be able to then go to a bank, and then they can get credit to expand their operations. So you can see what formalizing does to a business. That is basically, you can go to a club, and you can walk into a bank, and they formalize your operations. And then the other thing we need to do in order for companies to expand is to increase the venture capital. We need to increase the venture capital in the country. I think small micro businesses can get lending from microfinance institutions. That's just it. The small micro businesses can get funding from microfinance institutions, while the big multinationals can get funding from the big banks. So that leaves upon the middle high growth businesses without any sort of credit line to be able to grow their operations. So I think we need middle high growth businesses. These are the multinationals of tomorrow. That is the medium high growth businesses. These are the multinationals of tomorrow, and we need to be able for them to access credit, let's say of between $100,000 to, let's say, $10 million. That is the bracket of businesses that really need to be able to access this funding, so that then they can expand their operations, and then of course they will be able to hire more people, buy more machinery, buy more, and in that way they will be able to increase their operations. And that is how to fund these businesses. That is how to fund these businesses. But right now, you have the micro businesses going to the microfinance institutions, and then you have the big multinational companies going to the big banks, and now you are left with the medium high growth businesses, which are not able to get any line of credit. And that's why when you see banks lending to government, it's a very it's an atrocity. When you see big banks lending to government, so then it becomes cheaper to lend to government, because the government is the credit of last resort. because a government normally it cannot default because it is deemed as 100% credit worthy. That's most governments, they are deemed 100% credit worthy unless maybe there's a coup or there is some certain regime that is going to maybe a socialist regime. But for most banks, they consider lending to government being a better business model than lending to businesses. So we are not lending to businesses so that they can expand their operations, and this just leaves our businesses without any line of credit, and that is why then we need to be able to and make sure that we have our businesses that these banks are prevented from lending to businesses. And I think when we do that, then we'll be able to lend to businesses, we will be able to buy more machinery, we'll be able to extend a line of credit. Otherwise, you can't see the amount of $1 trillion debt, trillions of shillings of debt, the amount of trillions of shillings of debt, they are increasing in value because we are funding government excesses, and basically this debt, and then we need to ask, is it going to do does it go to do projects which have a bearing on the people? Maybe that's what we need to ask. Does this debt go to do projects that have a bearing on the people? Normally it does not. And so when we think about it, this is not the time to be able, this is not the time to lend to government. This is the time to lend to businesses so that these businesses can be the multinationals of tomorrow. And when we have, it should not be an anomaly for an African to own a multinational company. Really, it should not be an anomaly for an African to own a multinational company. Why is it that we think the only businesses Africans can own is a vegetable stall, is a fruit vendor, is a hawker, is a small Kibandaski hotel? So basically, these are the sort of businesses we think to be a taxi operator. These are the sorts of businesses we think that Africans, Kenyans can own, but it should not be an anomaly for an African to own a multinational company. And these Africans can own multinational company when we make it easy for them to get credit. And I think you have venture capital. I think this is something we need to explore. We need venture capital in the country. We need venture capital in Africa so that then you can have businesses resorting to a line of credit when they're just an idea. And because some banks usually need you to be in business for at least 6 months, sometimes 2 to 3 years. They say 6 months, but usually 2 to 3 years, so that they can look at your cash flow before deciding to lend you money. But I think some businesses are really intangible. Look at intellectual property rights kind of businesses. These businesses are really intangible wealth. So basically, wealth is now intangible ideas. At least that's what the great management theorist Peter Drucker says. Wealth is now intangible wealth. Wealth is now intangible ideas. And when wealth is intangible ideas, this means you cannot carry it to a bank. Maybe the idea is just in some form of writing, is in some form of MB, maybe 50 MB. That's the idea of the business, and a bank manager will not be in a position to know that. So that's why we need a venture capital to be working, and for that to happen, we need at least to invest maybe $1 billion, 100 billion shillings in venture capital. This is what will fund the multinationals of tomorrow. So then, when we fund the multinationals of tomorrow, then our businesses can really be on the uptake, and this is how we are going to enable the kind of wealth creation and prosperity to take place in the country. This is how we are going to enable the kind of production of jobs. And think about businesses in AI. Think about software engineering businesses, and I think this is where our universities come in. We must be able to have our universities generating ideas, generating knowledge from research. And the thing is that, whereas of course I know African governments have to make that decision on whether to fund the goals of a country, maybe feeding hungry people, versus funding ivory tower ideas, whose results may not be feasible. in the medium, in the short to medium term. But I think in the long run, in the long term, funding research is really for the benefit of our country, because and I know African governments have been told by the IMF and World Bank that concentrate on basic education, don't concentrate on higher education. This is another thing that we need to disabuse. African governments have been told that concentrate on basic education and don't concentrate on higher education, because basic education is and basically they say that basic education benefits society while higher education benefits benefits the individual. So I think we need to concentrate on research, so then we can channel ideas from research, then we bring venture capital to be able to take these ideas to the market. Of course, imagine if we fund just 1 million of research to our professors every year, then out of that, that 1 million is out of the 10,000 professors we fund, maybe how many? Maybe one, maybe 10, maybe 5% of that. That's about 50. And that's about 500 businesses. Maybe there will be multi-billion-dollar companies. That is how you create a big multi-dollar billion companies out of wealth being intangible ideas. So why don't we do these things? And you have the likes of Bitangendemo who express such things. They say that the country must begin thinking along the lines of creating intangible wealth. This is how Kenya, this is how Africa is going to develop, by creating intangible wealth, so that then you can have the country blossoming on to a really, really great height. So that's it about creating intangible wealth. And I think venture capital, we need at least $1 billion in venture capital. I think in 2023, out of the $625 billion that were extended to venture capitals to startups around the world. In 2023, $625 billion was extended to startups around the world, but only about $1 billion came to Africa, and that is not even the whole story, because even in this $1 billion, they need you to have Harvard, Stanford pedigree. So if you're just a run-of-the-mill African, if you are just a run-of-the-mill African, then basically you will not get this funding because you don't have that Harvard Stanford pedigree. You need to have the Harvard Stanford pedigree in order to access this venture capital, and I don't think lots of Africans have gone to Harvard. Maybe just about 30 or so per year go to Harvard, and still so this means that the thousands upon thousands of Africans that don't have this Harvard Stanford pedigree don't get this venture capital, and that is why then we have Africans having great ideas. The next Microsoft is in our bedrooms, the next Google is in our bedrooms, the next X is in our bedrooms, the next YouTube is in our bedrooms, because we find it very hard to be able to scale our idea, to take it from an idea to a practical company on the ground. It's very hard. Why? Because we view that is the business of we view the business of that is creating a startup, that is upscaling a startup. We find it to be very we find the business of creating a startup to be basically an African owning a multinational is an anomaly. So they expect the governments, even the African governments, they expect that the kind of businesses we are going to do is basically that of selling fruit by the roadside, that of selling vegetable by the roadside, being a border. These are the kind of businesses our governments expect us to do. But with these people managed, in Google you'll find an African project manager, in Facebook, in X you'll find an African project manager, even at NASA you'll find an African project manager. But why don't we have African versions of these companies? That is what we must ask ourselves. Why don't we have African versions of these companies? Why? China has in place of Google, it has Baidu. China has in place of X and Facebook, it has Weibo. In place of Facebook Messenger, it has X. It has Tencent. In place of YouTube, it has TikTok. So you can imagine that basically for this country Why is it that we have African project managers in these companies, and yet we cannot have African versions of these companies? So that says a lot about us. We are basically good at producing what we cannot consume and consuming what we can produce. That is what not the late, that's what Professor P.L.O. Lumumba says. Africa is good in producing what it cannot consume and consuming what it cannot produce, and in both instances losing trillions in both occasions, so basically I think we are not doing a service to ourselves. We need to have a startup center in every village in Africa. We need to have a startup center at the very least in every town where there will be free internet, free office space, and maybe have an idea and maybe have just 500,000 shillings of venture capital. Why don't we think in these lines? Why did our leaders go wrong? Why don't they think along these lines? This is basically how we should be thinking. But then, our people, when you have a campaign platform of a wheelbarrow, what does that mean? That is a Neanderthal age. That is a Stone Age kind of a tool. When you have a wheelbarrow, I'm not saying anyone that is using a wheelbarrow, I'm not degrading them, but I'm saying that in the age of AI, but you're showing as a wheelbarrow. So what does that mean? I think basically our leaders don't have the grandest ideas on how to compete in the 21st century economy. They have no idea of how to compete in the 21st century economy. So basically we are left to our own devices. You have, I think there is on TikTok when someone who goes around asking people what kind of job do they do versus what they studied in campus. So you have 80% of 90% of graduates not being able to find jobs. So basically our economy is not producing good enough jobs so that then it can absorb people. So basically I think we are very much and we are underperforming in an environment where wealth is intangible ideas. We are very much underperforming. So that's, I think, more companies are closing down. So that needs to change at all. And then another, I think that I would like to look at Uhuru to GenZs. You must fight for your rights. Uhuru to GenZs. You must fight for your rights. So this is former President Uhuru Kenyatta urging Gen Zs that they must fight for their rights. So basically, this is about Mandamano, going to Mandamano. So of course they say this movement is leaderless, this movement is tribeless, but I think it needs to be sort of organized so that we can fight for the real change in the country. And I think you have President Ruto being scared a little bit and not going outside, but then he came out and now he is basically on the driver's seat. So basically, was the Gen Z movement scuttled? Was it scuttled? So basically, we need to be able to demand for reforms. We need to be able to demand for change in the country. The country is headed in the wrong direction, and I think it showed that in the way it was treated. The country headed in the wrong direction, and I think what we must be doing, what we must be able to do, is just to be able to demand that the Ruto administration gives the Gen Zs, puts the country in the right trajectory. Look at the corruption. People basically vomiting on our shoes. Look at how they vomit on our shoes. Basically because they have access to public money, and that is why I say the quickest way to make money in Africa, is by joining politics, just being close to power. It is not by your creative genius trick, it is not by your hard work, it is not by talent. It is basically the quickest way to make money in Africa is by being close to power, where you will divert resources to public resources to your private bank accounts. Look at Africa's that is richest woman, once Africa's richest woman, who now wants to buy for the presidency in Angola, Isabel dos Santos. She became the richest woman in Africa after her dad placed her as the head of the Petroleum Revenue Authority in her country, and then she converted public funds to her private bank accounts, and that's how she became the richest woman in Africa. So basically, that's just how you become rich in Africa, by converting public resources, stealing public resources, and then diverting into your bank accounts. In Japan, what happens to the corrupt? The corrupt commit suicide in Japan because of the shame they have for society. What happens to the corrupt in China? The corrupt in China are shot by the firing squad because of the theft they have inflicted on the society. But what happens to the corrupt? And in Europe and America, what happens to the corrupt? The corrupt are resigned as they wait for the long arm of the law to catch up with them. But what happens to the corrupt in Africa? The corrupt in Africa are celebrated and re-elected back to office, and I don't think it augurs well for Africa that we have our corrupt people, then we celebrate them and we re-elect them back to office. I think according to the Zambian economist Dr. Dambisa Moshi says that Africa has lost at least $1 trillion to corruption since independence. That Africa has lost at least $1 trillion to corruption since independence. So when you account for corruption outflows from Africa, then Africa is a net donor to the world. It is not a net recipient in aid. Then Africa is a net donor to the world. It is not a net recipient in aid. So that shows you that corruption really does us in. That corruption really does us in. So that's it. Then what does Trump's second term mean for Africa? What does Trump's second term mean for Africa? I just think it means that Africa will be isolated. America will isolate itself. Trump has very unpalatable terms for very unpalatable view of Africa. He views Africa as a shithole place. He views Africa as one place where basically people that is he views Africa as one place where people are in mental institutions, people are in prison, so he doesn't have very kind words for Africa. And indeed, Africa is really just a footnote in America's foreign policy. Africa is a footnote in America's foreign policy, so it is looked as more as an aid and humanitarian hotspot than a trade and investment destination. So Africa is just a place where they come to get their raw materials from, and that's why maybe they don't want Africa to develop, because then we'll demand that we begin using those raw materials. So Africa is viewed that way. It's in very unpalatable terms. So you can expect there will not be much that will happen in Africa during the Trump presidency, except some few aid. And I think even Donald Trump paused aid not just to Africa, but U.S. aid to all over the world. So basically, Donald Trump will have a very unpalatable view of Africa, sometimes even borders on racism, because he says he wants immigration from nicer countries such as Norway. He doesn't want immigration from these shithole countries such as Africa. So that is the view of Donald Trump towards Africa. So basically, Trump, I don't think he is going to change anything in Africa. It is up to the African leaders to be able to make Africa heaven. We have everything. Look at a country such as DR Congo. The mineral waste potential of DR Congo is about $30 trillion. That's just the mineral waste potential of DR Congo. It's about $30 trillion, but that will only happen if it converts uranium to nuclear power, if it converts gold and diamond to jewelry, if it converts copper to electronics, if it converts titanium to aeroplane parts, if it converts coffee beans to coffee drinking chains, if it converts that is cotton to designer clothes. That is DR Congo alone, its mineral waste potential is $30 trillion. So you can imagine. So what about the rest of Africa? It could easily be $500 trillion. That's the kind of wealth that Africa is sitting on, $500 trillion. So we don't need these other powers to be able to develop Africa. We can develop Africa by ourselves, and that's why then Africa has to look inwards to itself, not to the West with its 600-year history of black subjugation, not to China with its debt-stop diplomacy. Africa just has to look inwards to itself and stop being just used as a playground for the West and the East, or for the West and China. Africa needs to take care of its own. It needs to be really that place where things do happen, that place where gods do come true. And I think if that happens, then we'll not need America at all. They're the ones who need us. It is Africa that it is the world that needs Africa. Africa does not need the world, and of course, it is the West that has just subjugated Africa for all this time. And of course, Africans labor to build America by way of slave labor. Maybe Donald Trump should be reminded of that, even as he calls Africans very, very unpalatable terms. Of course, Donald Trump has said he has never seen any country led by a black person that is successful. That is what Donald Trump says. He has never seen any country in the world that is led by a black person that is successful. So, what does that mean? That means then that we have to pull up our socks. We have been subjugated for the last 600 years. We have been down for the last 600 years, but it is time that we pull up and really got our act together. And I think that's how we are going to develop. That's how we are going to write the next African miracle story. We must begin writing the miracle story of Africa. It must not be a deferred dream every time. We must not be kicking the can of development down the road. That's just not it. We must not be kicking the can of development down the road. And then finally, what will be the next leader of the Democratic Party? Who should be the next leader of the Democratic Party? Of course, the Democratic Party, this is now American politics. The Democratic Party has lost the elections to the Republicans. Of course, now you can have, but I think the Democrats pander to both the middle class, both the working class and the billionaire class, and they lost because the identity was changed. The Democrats pander to both the billionaire class and the working class, and in that sense, they lost their identity. So they need to return back to the working class. That's how they are going to renew themselves. That's how the Democrats are going to renew themselves. Stop pandering. The last three Democrat presidents have all been corporate centers. That is Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden. They have all been corporate centers. Now they need to return and be the party of the working class. In an appearance at the Harvard Institute of Politics, you have the Senator Bernie Sanders saying the poorest 90% of Americans have transferred at least $50 trillion to the top 1% of Americans in the last 50 years. You can imagine $50 trillion in the last 50 years has been transferred from the poorest 90% of Americans to the richest 1%. So that shows you the kind of wealth inequality in America right now. Basically, that inequality is simply astounding, and this is why I would hope that the Democrats need to find the next leader who is a pro working class, who champions the issues of the working class. The Democrats maybe need to abandon the culture wars and return the Democrats towards being a party of labor, the Labour Party like in the UK. I think that's how the Democrats are going to fare. I think that's how the Democrats are going to maybe remake the country, and this is how then to remake the country and enable the Democrats to be really in the driving seat of the country. That's how they are going to endear themselves to Americans. Otherwise, so the Americans will elected a billionaire. They elected a billionaire in Donald Trump. Look at the other oligarchs. That is Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy. Look at the billionaires surrounding Donald Trump. You would think that America right now is some sort of oligarchy. At least that is what President Joe Biden in his departing speech said, that America is now an oligarchy. It is now no longer democracy, it is an oligarchy. And they say when democracy is unchanged, is when democracy, the price of democracy is a turn of vigilance. Otherwise, it very quickly morphs into an establishment, and then an oligarchy, and then a dictatorship, and finally a monarchy. And remember, America fought a bitter war so that it is not. America fought a bitter war so that it is not a monarchy against the British monarchy. So then, why would they? Why would they bring back? British monarchy to America? So I think Donald Trump says this is the golden age of America, but I don't think so. I just didn't think this will be a golden age for his billionaire friends. I just don't think he has that. I think he is vacuous, to say the least, other than the culture wars that he fought against. I think Donald Trump is vacuous. I don't think he will achieve much for America, but let's wait and see what sort of democracy, what sort of a country there he will bequeath Americans by the time he is leaving office on January 20, 2029. So now this is the time basically to be able to. I think tin pot dictators around the world are laughing at America. I think they say, look, someone that shouted has been elected, someone that stormed the Capitol and nearly made America a banana republic is now in charge of the White House. So you can see that America's golden age is truly behind it. America's golden days are truly behind it. So you can don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. That is Mabinda TV, Obinna TV fans. Mabinda TV. Don't forget to subscribe, and of course you can also get my my two books on the description box. My two books, that is the 1% continent, how Africa can rise up, the 1% continent, how Africa can rise up, and then the other book, give us your best and brightest. Why does Africa lose its best and brightest brains? That is, give us your best and brightest. Why does Africa lose its best brains? So bye for now. Till the next time. Bye for now.